Donald Trump, who had previously refused to meet with Volodymyr Zelensky, unexpectedly agreed to hold a one-on-one meeting and even stated that there is every chance to finally move towards signing a peace agreement. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, will meet with Trump again tomorrow, December 28, to discuss the draft peace plan. It covers security guarantees, a ceasefire for at least 60 days during the referendum, territories, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and post-war reconstruction of Ukraine. I suggest that in this episode we bring together all the information about what's on the agenda and what expectations there are for this meeting between Zelensky and Trump. But most importantly, what are the hidden pitfalls of these negotiations? What could unpleasantly surprise Ukrainians? And how are the Russians trying to disrupt the peace process? My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and write any comment under this episode. This really helps a lot with promoting the video on YouTube, and I would be grateful to you for that. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. So, tomorrow, December 28, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, will meet with his counterpart, Donald Trump. The day before, Zelensky presented the details of a framework peace agreement, which has been generally developed by Kyiv and Washington, but, I emphasize, has not yet been agreed upon with Moscow. This is a political document with appendices, which includes references to trilateral security guarantees, Ukraine, the United States and Europe, bilateral security guarantees from the United States of America, and a roadmap for Ukraine's prosperity. This is about the restoration and reconstruction of our country after the war. Among other things, the document provides for the confirmation of Ukraine's sovereignty and a non-aggression agreement between Ukraine and Russia with an overall monitoring mechanism. You can find more details about all 20 points of the peace plan on my YouTube channel in a separate episode. So if you haven't seen it yet, go to the YouTube channel right now and watch it. The strength of Ukraine is also being discussed. Europe, bilateral guarantees from the United States of America. If it dies, then the war will definitely continue. In addition, the document should establish Ukraine's path to the European Union with an accession date, privileged access to the European market, and a global development package. These are recovery funds, these are investments, and of course money for reconstruction, and of course prisoner exchanges, the return of hostages, and so on. At the same time, there are 2 points in the draft peace plan on which Ukraine and the United States have not yet reached a common position: the status of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the issue of territory. Trump insisted on meeting with Zelensky, saying he would only do so when the peace plan was ready to sign. Ukrainian diplomats had been trying to arrange a meeting between Zelensky and Trump for a long time, and at the end of November, let me remind you, Trump said that he hoped to meet with Zelensky and Putin, but only then, quote, when the agreement to end this war is final, or is in its final stages. Many Americans now say that if Trump agreed, it's at least in the final stages. I won't get ahead of myself, let's discuss this now. Now Trump is giving vague comments about future negotiations. Apparently, having learned from his previous loud bravado, Trump said, and I quote, "Zelensky won't get anything until I approve it, we'll see what he gets." Well, probably the current agreement to meet from the United States of America could mean that Trump's team is confident they will be able to achieve results in the foreseeable future. It can be assumed that Trump has the impression that the deal is almost ready and he can talk about something and get some options. But on the other hand, the second meeting will be at Mar-a-Lago, that is, at Trump's informal residence, not at the White House. So there is definitely not 100% certainty there. Suffrage. President Zelensky has repeatedly stated that he would prefer to discuss the issue of territory and obviously the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, specifically during a personal conversation with Trump. And recently, Zelensky directly stated that he hopes to bargain for more favorable territorial positions from Trump. Over time, negotiations have brought Ukraine and the United States positions somewhat closer. The draft framework document proposes to fix the line of contact as of the date of the agreement in the Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions. Wherever we stand is where we stay, with the withdrawal of Russian troops from other regions, namely Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, Sumy, and Kharkiv regions. At the same time, in Donbas, there is talk of potentially creating a free economic zone. Well, at the very least, the Americans are no longer demanding that Ukraine withdraw its armed forces from Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Volodymyr Zelensky is basically hedging his bets. This week, he stated that if the peace agreement in any way addresses the territorial issue, except for the principle of "we stay where we are," then the entire document could be put to a referendum. That is not just the territorial issue, but the entire peace plan, the peace agreement, would be put to a referendum, but this referendum is only possible if there is a complete agreement to end the war. That is, all the conditions for an actual ceasefire for at least 60 days and legitimate conditions for holding it have already been set out. And this is a clever move. That means the peace agreement won't be signed without a referendum, and there won't be a referendum without at least a 60-day ceasefire. And now let's see how ready the Russians really are for peace, real peace, not just some fairy tales. Because first there needs to be a ceasefire, then referendums, and then possibly the signing of a peace agreement. In addition, Zelensky is taking another trump card out of the Russians' hands. The bold dictator Putin and his people were shouting at the top of their lungs that Zelensky is illegitimate, that he cannot sign any peace agreement. And essentially, now the Ukrainian authorities are saying, okay, the decision will not be made by Zelensky, but by the Ukrainian people in a referendum. That's all there is to it regarding the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. The United States is now proposing joint management of the plant between Ukraine, the United States, and Russia, with dividends distributed 33 to 33%, while Ukraine insists on a joint operation only with the United States of America, 50-50. With the mandatory demilitarization of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, Enerhodar, and the Kakhovka hydroelectric power station, Russia is proposing that the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant be controlled by Russia and the United States, excluding Ukraine. As for the general features of the negotiations, the Kremlin's position now looks extremely vague and, it seems like the Kremlin is a bit confused. Let me remind you, on December 20 and 21, the United States President's special envoy Witkoff and Kushner held a meeting with Putin's emissary Kirill Dmitriev in Miami. And following the results, Kremlin press secretary Dmitry Peskov refused to disclose the contents of the documents that Dmitriev allegedly brought from the United States. Let me quote. "We still believe, even at this stage, that it is highly inadvisable to communicate through the media. Therefore, we will not talk about what exactly Dmitriev brought, and even more so, we will not discuss it through the press." Well, here you could of course poke fun at the Russians because the spokesperson for their president is basically saying, listen, you Russians, who are you anyway? Should we really communicate with you through the press and tell you what the authorities are doing? Yes, you are not worthy of that. But if we speak seriously, then we need to look at what the Russian Foreign Ministry has been saying, because they started claiming that supposedly Zelensky's peace plan is somehow not right and so on. According to Peskov, Moscow will continue contacts with the United States through existing channels in the near future. Russia's position on the settlement will be formulated based on the information received from Dmitriev. Subsequently, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov stated that the plan made public by Zelensky is radically different from the version being discussed by representatives of Russia and the United States, that is, the version brought by Dmitriev. But this is exactly the document that was actually developed on December 20th to 21st in Miami. Let me remind you, the negotiation process was as follows. Witkoff and Kushner first met with the Ukrainian delegation, then spent 2 days with Dmitriev, then met Umerov, Ukraine's representative. Umerov took the document to Zelensky, who made it public, while Ryabkov insists this is not the case at all. And overall, it's very strange that the Russians are yelling that Zelensky announced the wrong peace plan, but at the same time insist that nothing should be discussed publicly at all. Listen, if Zelensky showed the wrong peace plan and Dmitriev brought something else from Miami to Moscow, then why doesn't Moscow show the whole world this very something else? So what's the problem? So now the Russians are saying, just take our word for it, we're continuing to discuss some kind of peace plan with the Americans, as they say, within the spirit of Anchorage, but we won't tell you what it is. Publicly, that's not what we like. We have our own thing, but we won't share it. And now the Kremlin has already stated that Russia will respond to the ideas presented in the Ukrainian-American draft framework peace agreement only after the new year. That's all. However, due to diplomatic activity from Kyiv, the Russians are already forced to send some signals through the media, in particular about their alleged readiness for a ceasefire to hold a referendum in Ukraine. According to Bloomberg, Moscow is considering a 20-point peace plan developed between Ukraine and the United States as a starting point for further negotiations. But obviously the plan in its current form does not satisfy many of the aggressors' whims, but the Russians also cannot reject it. That's why Russia continues to pretend to be interested in peace talks, mainly to avoid being accused by the United States of disrupting the negotiations. And here's an interesting point. Russia doesn't just want the negotiations to be held behind closed doors for no reason. I don't think there will be any public signals of concessions from Russia. That doesn't match their methods, and anyway, the Russian Ivan wouldn't understand it even without arms or legs. Putin is essentially a thug who follows street rules. How could he come out and say, listen, I said it would be just as tough, and then we actually started negotiating. Well, that's just not how things are done by the code. That's why no one will publicly address the Russian herd, so they'll keep escalating in public. That's their logic, and that's how it'll always be. So, don't beat yourself up when you hear Ryabkov shouting that they've rejected the peace plan. Nevertheless, under these circumstances, the risk of increased pressure on Zelensky and Ukraine as a whole is still growing. The Russians are constantly trying to outbid and be the first to whisper something in Trump's ear before his meeting with Zelensky in order to disrupt the meeting. But now Europe has managed to ensure that Zelensky is not left alone with Trump. And here I'll quote Zelensky. At the very least, we will join online, and our European partners will be in contact when we discuss the entire process. Of course, we need to find some format in the near future where not only Ukraine and America will be present, but also Europe will be represented. And during previous conversations between Zelensky and Trump, let me remind you, it was the Europeans who somewhat reduced the level of tension. But personally, I don't expect that after the meeting between Zelensky and Trump, we will see a finalized peace plan that is already ready to be signed. No, Ukraine and the United States can make progress on bilateral issues. Yes, there will be an attempt to finalize the agreement now, but I'm not sure it will be successful. Moreover, even if Kyiv and Washington are able to find common ground on the disputed points, it won't resolve the issue. The fundamental obstacle to peace is Russia's persistent unwillingness to end this war. But here, Ukraine made a clever move, as they say, to put the Russians in a bad light. Look, Russia via its spokesperson. Peskov says that the negotiations should be kept secret, that no one will discuss them publicly, especially not with some unwashed Russians. What does Zelensky do? Zelensky insists that his meeting with Trump tomorrow be public, with cameras, journalists, questions, a briefing, and so on. As a result, the whole world publicly sees who wants peace and who is playing some behind-the-scenes games. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you found this episode interesting and informative, you can support the work of this YouTube channel with your donation or subscription through the links and details provided. In the description of this video, it clearly says support Alexei Pichi's channel. Use whatever format works best for you. I will be grateful for any support from you. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.